with our Crop Talk webinar series. And so we'll just go ahead and jump right in here to our Crop Talk series. Today's focus is going to be on weed control in Northwest Kansas. Let me move one more thing here. All right, we are ready to go. So our focus today is on weed control in Northwest Kansas. Now, this Crop Talk webinar series is happening, started last week, will go clear till the middle of March, and we'll be addressing the questions that we are getting from our growers. And so that's really how these topics were identified. There's many topics that we'll be moving on through, but it's being held on Tuesdays and a few Wednesdays from 10:30 to 11:30 in the morning. So you can, by registering to attend this webinar series, you will get reminders each Tuesday and Wednesday morning for the webinars that will be presented that day. Okay, so this is the Crop Talk team. So this has really been a team effort of many extension agents in Northwest Kansas to bring this type of programming to you. With having some challenges on being able to get together in person, we decided to take this all online, and that is why we have the webinar series going on right now. So some of these folks you may recognize because they are your local extension agents, and so they are all of us behind the scenes making this happen. So tell them thank you when you see them, and if you get to see them out and about. So this has really been very much a team effort because it takes a lot of behind the scenes to make this all happen. Okay, so let's jump right in. So audience interaction, we need to know what you guys want to know during these presentations. So you can do this in a couple of ways. You can ask a question, and if you are using Zoom, if you go over here to right down here at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. So if you have a question for Sarah or Vipan as we move through today about something specific on controlling Palmer Amaranth, put your question into that Q&A box. That helps us track them so we don't get them lost. Now, if you have any technical issues or anything else along those lines, you can always use the chat function in Zoom to chat with us individually to figure out what's going on. Now, if you are live on YouTube, there is a comment box that you can make comments in or questions as we're going through. You have to have an account created in order to do that on YouTube. If both of these seem a little overwhelming, just go ahead and shoot me an email and put your question in the email, and I will get that brought into our Q&A session here at the end of these presentations. Okay, one thing that we would like to do is really help direct some of the future of our talks as we go. And so we would like you guys to participate in the poll everywhere question. Well, it's basically a poll everywhere. We're asking you for your opinion on as we go through things. And so you can do this a couple of ways. You can either type that pollev.com/KSU into an internet browser. And so somebody will put that in the chat box over on the side here. So you guys can just copy and paste that into your internet browser. Or if you have your cell phone with you, you can enter get logged into the system in this way. In the to box up here where it says to, where you typically put a number, type 22333 and type KSU into where you would have the message. So 22333, and then where you would have a message, put in KSU and then hit send. That will log you into this poll everywhere system. Okay, so as we're getting moving here, everybody send in your initial text to get logged in, or open this in your internet browser. And we're going to go ahead and start with a first question. And this is really just you guys' chance to be able to utilize this system. So how cold was it at your house this morning? And so we have a few folks. The cool thing about Poll Everywhere is that we can see the results just as everybody is submitting their information. And so I know when I looked at our house this morning, it said 6 degrees, and that was south of St. Francis. And so I'm curious to what everybody had this morning. And I don't know, it was probably about 5:30 when I looked this morning at ours. So, okay, so we can see the answers, folks' answers coming in as we go here. If you're having challenges getting information into the Poll Everywhere, please put it in the chat box and we'll try to get it answered for you. Let me just see on chat to see if there's anything that I have missed. Okay. I think we're in good shape here. We have some more answers coming in, but this is how you guys can see how Poll Everywhere works. A majority of us had 1 to 5 degrees this morning, so pretty chilly. And so that's why we had all that warm music as we got started to think about the tropics, and someplace warmer than where we are right now. Okay, we will advance this. Apparently my computer has locked up. Okay, there we go. All right. So for anybody who needs CCA credits, there's a couple of ways you can get your CCA credits. Okay, you can email me, and that's just jfalkjones@ksu.edu. Email me at the beginning and at the end of the presentation and give me your name and your CCA number. Now, if you have the QR app on your phone, just go ahead and grab your phone, open up your Certified Crop Advisors app, and then we will scan the QR code. That will be showing up at the end of the presentation. So you can do this in 2 ways. Either send me an email with your contact information, your name and your CCA number, or you can scan the QR code at the end of the presentation. Okay, with that, Chris, this is all yours.
All righty, thanks, Jeannie. Again, if you have questions, if you are on Zoom, go ahead and throw those into the Q&A box. I believe Craig will be monitoring that, and he will hit on that here at the end of the session. And if you are following along on YouTube, you can go ahead and type those questions into the comment box, and I believe Aaron is going to be helping us out with that later on. So we'll go ahead and get things started here. We do have 2 presenters with this session. Again, it's going to be in the weed management and that pesky Palmer Amaranth. Today is going to be mostly on the Northwest focus. If you do live in the North Central area, you are more than welcome to join tomorrow, and these folks will be back and touch on some information a little more specific to that area. So our 2 presenters today, we do have Dr. Sarah Lancaster, who is a weed management specialist with K-State. Sarah aims to provide farmers in Kansas with information to develop profitable integrated weed management programs. And then we also have Dr. Vipan Kumar, who is a weed scientist up at the research center there at Hayes. Vip is a Hayes researcher, as I mentioned, has focused on herbicide-resistant Palmer Amaranth and kochia, which are 2 of the most aggressive weeds in Kansas, especially for those of us in the Northwest area. So with that, we will go ahead and turn it over to our 2 presenters.
Sarah, I think you're up first.
All right, here we go. Let me get my screen shared here. All right, you guys should be seeing my slides, right? Jeannie, can you see the title slide?
Them.
Okay, perfect.
Yep,
awesome.
You're good to go.
All right. Good morning, guys. Thanks for joining us this morning. So Sandra and Jeannie sent out a survey to y'all as we were planning these discussions about what kind of things you might want to talk about. And one of the questions that came back that kind of piqued my interest and I thought would be good to talk about today was a question about using layered residual herbicides. So we're going to take the next 20 minutes or so and kind of step through some of the whys and hows and results of using layered residual herbicides. So feel free. Jeannie has talked about using the Q&A box and sending questions in. I welcome your questions as we move along today. Before we jump into the layered residual discussion, I thought it would be prudent just to give you guys a super fast update on some new products and new technologies. I'm sure many of you, if you do grow some soybeans, are familiar with the fact that Extend Flex is available. And when I talk about this, I just want to make sure that folks are recognizing the fact that they're going to need to pay a little bit of extra careful attention to record keeping, because we're going to have Extend as well as Extend Flex varieties on the market this year. So good record keeping and good communication with your custom applicators is going to be important in that regard, in addition to all of the communication and record keeping associated with the Extend traits. One of the big new changes to the new labels for Extend is the requirement for a volatility reduction agent, or a pH buffer. So Bayer is calling theirs a VRA, and they have licensed their product out to a number of different distributors. So this list that you see here, this grid that you see here on the screen, has been changing about once a week or so, adding some new brand names. So you'll want to keep an eye on that if you intend to use the Bayer products. BASF has one product they're calling theirs a pH buffer. So they are different chemicals and they are going to work a little bit differently. So the BASF product is Centris. It will have a lower application rate, 8 ounces per acre is the target rate there. Last I checked, the label was not yet up on CDMS or any of those databases, but they are moving forward with that label, and it will be available, no problems. A couple of new registrations, no new products, but some new registrations for different brand names. In corn, we've got one product called Impact Core, which is going to be Impact plus acetochlor, which would be harness in this situation. And so there's that one. And then the one that we got to look at last summer here in Manhattan was Sinate, which is Impact plus Liberty. So a couple of post-emergence options there for corn. And then again, soybean growers, we have a Kyber, which is just the exact same thing as Fierce MTZ, and Panther MTZ, which is the exact same thing as Dimetric Charge. Now, some other label updates that you folks in the Northwest part of the state might be particularly interested in. Anthem Flex now has a label for sunflower production. So that may be of specific interest to some growers. Authority Edge, same thing, also now has a label for sunflower production. So that could be helpful. Broadax, they amended that label to add a 4-month rotation restriction into dry beans. So that'll give you some guidance there. And the other item that I want to draw your attention to, I just spoke with my BASF rep last week, and this label again is not on the websites yet, but they are still confident that for 2021, they're going to have an extension of the application limits for Residual to go all the way through V8 in corn production. So that ties into the things we're going to talk about later today. And I've also just been giving a quick update on the Atrazine re-registration process. So they did release an interim decision. We're still a good ways from having a final decision on what the future holds for Atrazine. As I've watched some of these re-registration decisions come down, there's a lot more emphasis on preventing off-target movement to protect endangered species. So these changes here that you see are couched in that perspective. So just something to think about as we go forward, and think about the fact that all of our herbicides and all of our pesticides have to have this re-registration process. So we could be seeing some additional restrictions to prevent off-target movement for a lot of products. Okay, so Jeannie has you guys logged into Poll Everywhere through KSU, and I think we may have had a miscommunication, and it is 100% my fault, Jeannie. Can they text an answer to you even if the poll is here? Do you know, Jeannie?
I don't know. And that I should have followed up with you a little bit, Sarah. I think it will show up. I think, I don't know how to make this work.
Well, here's what we'll do. I'm going to call an audible. Can folks just type it into the chat? Or
Yes.
if they're on YouTube or something, they can just type it into the chat box there. Will that work?
Yes, totally works. Yes, everybody put it in your chat box down at the bottom of the screen, or type it into the comment box on YouTube. Sorry about that, guys. Oh,
Yeah.
somebody got it to work. Palmer Amaranth.
Yeah,
That's the one we want to talk about.
that's the one we're going to talk about. But see, that's why I said 2, Jeannie. Because because
And we do have some comments coming into the chat box also. Palmer Amaranth, Palmer and Kosha, Palmer, Kosha and Palmer, Palmer and Kosha. Ah, somebody got into pull everywhere and got tumble windmill grass included.
There we go. Oh, Jeannie.
It's something Sarah and I talk about a lot.
Yes.
Okay. In the chat box, more Palmer Amaranth, a couple more Palmer and windmill grass, a couple more Kosha showing up.
Jeannie, I think we need to talk seriously before spring gets any closer about windmill grass.
I think so too.
I mean, we've had lots of conversations. I think we need to get some action here. So, all right. Well, hey, thank you guys so much for rolling with the punches there. You guys are great. Common mullein. Okay. I would be curious to know, Cole, about your common mullein. What system are you seeing that in? See if he gets it. See if we get an answer into the chat. All right. So let's move on. Okay, so let's talk quickly, guys. Thinking about chemical weed control in corn. Okay. I get neighbor CRP. There you go. That's the answer to the common mullein question. That makes sense. All right. So let's think about the herbicide application calendar in corn production systems. So, we've talked a little bit, we're kind of past this time period now, right? About fall applications. We're now starting to think about early pre-plant applications. So maybe some of you guys are going out making your applications for kochia control and other things, and really kind of setting yourself up. Right? You're kind of setting yourself up to maximize the efficacy of your pre-emergent program. Okay. So from my perspective, guys, we're wanting these fall and early pre-plant programs to be cheap. They don't have to be expensive to set us up well for our pre-emergent programs to work. Okay. So, our pre-emergent programs, this is the core of what we need to do here, right? As far as chemical weed control. So, spend your money here. If in doubt, spend your money on a good pre-program if you're trying to decide where to allocate your weed control dollars. The best time to control weeds is before we ever lay eyes on them. And that's especially true with things like kochia and Palmer, okay? And then, thinking about e-post applications, we're going to want to go out timely with those. And just, I've talked to some folks who are very persistent about this idea that folks need to just have a calendar. They just need to set a reminder in their calendar that they need to go out and spray 3 to 4 weeks after they put their pre down. And so just being aware of that importance of that timely pre. And again, especially with things like Palmer, where size really does have an impact on the amount of control that we get. And then also thinking about, as we think about managing herbicide resistance and preventing weed seed production, okay? That's the whole crux of this idea of these layered residual programs, and we'll talk about that some more. But another key component of this idea of preventing weed seed production, especially for herbicide resistant weeds, is this idea of scouting after our post applications and coming back and following up with a late post that, again, is effective, but probably doesn't need to be super expensive if we're getting out in a timely manner. All right, so Palmer Amaranth. You guys know Palmer Amaranth is our #1 weed problem really across the state. And so I just looked at some of the germination requirements for Palmer Amaranth, and this feeds into why we need these overlapping residuals. So data says that Palmer Amaranth will germinate once the soil temperature reaches 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so I just went to Mesonet and pulled data. These are the 2-inch soil temperatures at Colby, starting in April and running through October. And you can see almost that entire time, we have soil temperatures above 50 degrees, which tells me that Palmer Amaranth, if there's moisture there, is going to germinate throughout this whole entire growing season. And then one of the other things we know about Palmer Amaranth is that it has a base temperature of about 60 degrees. So that means once that air temperature hits about 60 degrees, that plant is full speed ahead, putting on growth, okay? And so if we're looking here, we start to really accumulate good growing conditions for Palmer Amaranth here late May, early June in Colby. And that doesn't plateau. We had a little bit of a plateau in 22 here in late September, but then look, we continue to see growth all the way through October. So managing this weed is a season-long challenge, as you all know. So residual herbicides, these are the foundation for our program, these pre-emergent products, right? Typically, they're going to go out at planting, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit about this decrease here. We see a decrease in efficacy, a decrease in the concentration of the herbicide in the soil as we go over time. And so obviously what's going to happen there is we're going to see a decrease in the activity of those pre-emergent products. Now, in general, we think about the fact that maybe that's not such a big deal because we're going to get this crop canopy coming on, right? And shade is a great herbicide. But sometimes we have a little bit of a gap here. Okay, so let's talk about herbicide persistence. That's just the $5 word for saying how long a herbicide is active in the soil. And when companies are looking at developing their rate recommendations, they're looking for this sweet spot between how little do they need so that they do not have carryover to subsequent crops versus how much do they need to get the maximum level of weed control. So we're looking for this sweet spot here in terms of how much herbicide we're going to put in the soil and how long it's going to stay there. Now we measure this in terms of using a term called half-life, which basically is just how long it takes for half of that herbicide to go away. So this is kind of what that half-life might look like. So one half-life, let's say, for example, is 20 days. So then you could plot out to the second half-life, the third half-life, so you can see how that pesticide generally dissipates, okay? So one of the questions that I get a lot is, specifically comparing things like harness and warrant with dual, okay? Which of these group 15 products is the best residual herbicide? That could be almost as divisive an issue as if your tractor has green paint or red paint, but there are some differences among them. They have similar activity, similar modes of action, and really relatively similar efficacy. But the data says that you're going to look for a little bit longer activity out of our metolachlor products relative to our acetochlor products, okay? So just a little bit more activity out of the dual types of products than out of the harness or warrant types of products. Half-lives here, you can see when we think about herbicides that can have activity from the soil, we can think about atrazine up to 60 days, all the way down here. If you think about things like balance, it has a very short half-life in the soil. So what are the things that cause differences in those degradation rates? Well, differences in how well the chemical meets the needs of the bugs in the soil microbial soil microorganisms, okay? But there are a few things from an environmental perspective that are going to influence that in your particular field. So one thing would be how tightly that herbicide is attached to the soil. If it's attached to the soil, the microorganisms are not getting to it. Another thing would be previous applications. So atrazine is kind of the poster kid for this as far as this phenomenon we call enhanced degradation. So basically, the limit is about 5 is what I've seen. 5 applications of atrazine and you're going to start seeing a shortened life of that product, a shortened persistence. And so this is just an example with an ALS inhibiting herbicide. You can see the solid line is the concentration over time with no previous applications. And the dashed line is what they saw for the concentration, how it decreases over time when there were previous applications. Okay, so it's not just atrazine, it's a lot of products that experience this. Something else that influences microbial activity is moisture, right? So, irrigated systems have a little bit of an advantage, or I guess disadvantage here, depends on how you look at it, in terms of how long these products are going to last when they're primarily degraded by these microorganisms. And microorganisms are really influenced by the amount of soil moisture. So this is looking at isoxafluidal or balance. And I know these are busy graphs, but the line you want to pay attention to here is the one with these solid black circles. Okay, so this is dry soil, and you can see they started seeing a pretty substantial drop off here between 7 and 14 days. Okay, now let's look at soils that had greater moisture content. Let's just come out here to the far one. It's a little cleaner to look at. You can see here, they saw a significant decrease in the concentration of the isoxaflutal or the balance really within a week, okay? So soil moisture matters. This is why we tend to have more carryover problems when we have dry weather. The other thing that influences microbial activity and then consequently herbicide degradation is soil temperature. So the soil microorganisms are kind of like me. They've got about 20-degree temperature range where they're happy and they're at maximum activity. They don't like it when it's cold, and they don't actually like it when it gets too hot. So this is looking at some different soils and how a particular sulfonylurea herbicide degrades at cooler temperatures, so 43 Fahrenheit, versus warmer temperatures, which is they used 60-degree Fahrenheit. And honestly, if we were doing these studies in a controlled environment and trying to aim for optimum or maximum degradation, we would actually be looking for a temperature more like 75 or 80. But you can see here on this cooler scheme, they were still getting herbicide detections out 120 days. Okay, when they warmed the temperature up in the 60-degree side, they didn't even carry the line out past 75 days. Okay, so temperature matters. So if you have a cooler spring, you're actually probably going to get longer activity out of your residual herbicide than if you have a warmer spring and those microorganisms are breaking it down faster. All right, so here we are back to this pretty picture. We've got our residual herbicide breaking down. We've got our crop canopy building. We have weed emergence, right? Our residual herbicide has reached a concentration where it's not controlling our weeds, and our crop canopy is not filled in yet. We're going to make a post-emergent herbicide application. If we don't put a residual herbicide in with this post-application, we're still going to see emergence over this remainder of the period of time until the crop canopies. And, you know, you guys, I'm sure, have all seen this handful of escapes here down under the corn canopy. They look pretty sickly. And honestly, guys, they're probably not impacting yield. But number one, they are going to produce seed. There's some research that says that Palmer Amaranth escapes can produce up to 7 million seeds per acre, which is a pretty staggering number to think about when you think about just escapes. The other thing I want to make sure you guys have kind of on the front of your mind as you think about why do we care about these weeds that are not causing a yield loss? There's a reason they broke through that herbicide, and probably because they have a little less tolerance, or a little more tolerance rather, a little less sensitivity to whatever herbicide, whatever soil applied herbicide was out there. So the chances of this herbicide having some low, or this weed having some low level of resistance to your herbicide is relatively great, actually, okay? And that's not something we want to have carry forward. So what we want to see happen here is with this post herbicide application, we want to see some residual herbicides going in there so that we are stopping that emergence all the way through the time of canopy. All right, so let's play this one the same way, guys. If you are logged into My Poll Everywhere, please feel free to text or email, or I'm sorry, text or log in online. If not, please feel free to use the chat box or other mechanisms on YouTube. So what herbicides have you used as layered residuals? I'm curious to know what your all's preferences are. I see one comment in the chat box that says Outlook. I see acetochlor, metolachlor coming in, Callisto and Stinger as part of that acetochlor application. Scoparia, so that's isoxaflutal, Residual, Atrazine, Meso again. Excellent, excellent. Was there anything from the YouTube crowd?
I'm not seeing a lot popping up on YouTube, Sarah. Oh, here's one: metolachlor, atrazine, and sharpen.
Sharpen, okay.
Yep, that's what I see on YouTube.
Okay. Awesome. All right, well, let's go on. That just kind of a discussion point to see, so you guys can see what other folks are doing, so I can see maybe what some of the preferences are here. Okay, that helps me. All right, let's move on. There we go. Okay, so some things to think about. We looked at the length of activity, but another thing that I get questions on in terms of choosing these overlapping residuals is, in terms of how much is best, is how much rainfall is required for activation. Okay, so that's something to think about. And honestly, guys, acetochlor has a lower requirement of rainfall than dual. So as you're making your decisions, you can keep that in mind. And then the other thing to consider, of course, would be growth restrictions. And there's not a whole lot of difference among the products there. All right, let's look at a little bit of data. So these data come out of Nebraska, okay? Looking at applying acetochlor, applying warrants, either before, either before planting, at planting, or 2 passes, or 3 passes, okay? They looked at water hemp control, velvet leaf control, and green foxtail control. Now, my handy dandy little black line here, I drew across there at 95% control. If I'm thinking about the ratings in the weed control guide, that is excellent control, okay? Excellent control. And so any of these 2 or 3 pass programs with the acetochlor gave us greater efficacy, greater control of all 3 weeds compared to either the pre-plant or the at planting timing, okay? And this was 60 days after planting, so they went out a good ways when they measured that. Now, these are some data that one of my graduate students generated. And I'm gonna beg for forgiveness and tell you guys that these data came from Ottawa. So I know that it's the total opposite end of the state, but the point I want to make is not necessarily geography specific, okay? So we looked in this study just about how do some of these integrated management practices work together in soybeans. So layered residuals are considered a best practice for weed management. Row spacing, narrowing your row spacings is considered a best practice. And then we wanted to look at, are there any differences in some of these herbicide resistant systems? So we have Enlist beans and we have Liberty Link GT27 beans in this study. So there were no differences between the 2 soybean varieties when we looked at water hemp control. But when we looked at water hemp control at 4, 8, and 16 weeks after planting, the other thing I want to point out is there really weren't any differences among the row spacings, okay? I've got them broken out here just to show you that there were no differences there. And then the other thing to point out here is that actually, as long as we had a post-emergent application, we did not see a statistical difference in weed control. Now, that goes against everything I spent the last 15 minutes saying, right? But I want to bring that back around. Is that 95% or 98% control really enough? And if you think about, these numbers come from the literature. If you think about the fact that, you could have 350,000 escapes or seeds produced by escapes, and then you work that math through to how many plants you're going to get the next year, how many plants might be resistant in that next year, you could potentially still end up with over 500,000 seeds per acre that are potentially herbicide resistant in your field, okay? So even though we are seeing high levels of control, and even though the control that we're seeing may not be economically impactful this year, it's a management decision looking into the future to say that we want no seed rain going forward, okay? Because we don't want those herbicide resistant weeds to become established in our field. So those were the slides that I prepared for you today. I want to remind everyone, I know that Jeannie and the crew had the announcement about the chemical weed control guide scrolling through the slides before we started today. So I appreciate that. Please do pick up a copy or download a copy online. And I also wanted to draw your guys' attention. This is kind of my my current kind of passion project right now. I've started a podcast with some colleagues from North Dakota State and the University of Missouri. We're calling it the War Against Weeds. We're having a great time talking to specialists and consultants all across the Midwest about how to handle different aspects of weed control. So I'm trying to stay real practical and timely, and you know, everything from what consultants are seeing in the field to what the latest research on herbicide resistant screening is saying. So we're having a lot of fun, and we hope that you will find it fun and very informative, and I think you will. So I encourage you to check us out on Spotify or any of the other places you find your podcasts. And with that, I want to leave time for Vipan. So I encourage you guys to reach out. Email or social media is fantastic, and I'll look forward to hearing from you guys. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. We appreciate you joining us, and Sarah's going to stick around for those of you that do have questions. And as we get Vip loaded up here, those that do have questions, again, you can throw them into the chat box on YouTube or the comment box on YouTube, or if you're here on Zoom, you can go ahead and throw those into the Q&A box, and we will touch on those questions and get to as many as we can here later. And Craig has even posted it up there. We do have one thank you that has already popped in for your information, and just always good things to think about, especially on the thought of how many seeds are still out there if you do have a few escapees from year to year. So we appreciate Sarah's information. And Vipan is up next. Looks like he is fired up and ready to go. We'll get his presentation, or he's going to be getting his presentation up here. Vipan again is the weed scientist up here at the Research Center at Hayes. And he spends a lot of time, his research projects will spend a lot of time on kochia and Palmer Amaranth in northwest Kansas and around the state. But with that, looks like he's ready to go. So we'll turn it over to Vipan.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Chris, for the introduction. And thanks, Sarah, for putting together a pretty good talk on overlapping residuals or layer residuals and the importance of factors that really influence those pre-programs in terms of weed management. So I'm going to cover some of the results. So we have been doing some field studies here in Western Kansas over the years. So it'll be more of a real data coming from Western Kansas in terms of controlling Palmer Amaranth or kochia. These are the two key weed species I've been working with. And I really want to look at you guys, what you guys think. The first poll question is, which of the following two weed species is the most difficult to control in Northwest Kansas? Kochia, Palmer, both, or none of the above? So let's see which one is your favorite. Okay. So no vote on kochia yet.
Vipan, there is also a couple of comments mentioning both, or the letter C, some voting happening in the chat box and in the comment box. So
thanks, Jeannie.
Yep.
Okay, it seems like we have pretty good voting here, saying both kochia and Palmer Amaranth are the challenging weeds, which is true. I wanted to see among those tools or between these tools, which one is the most challenging one? But both are challenging ones. So let's move on and see, talk about some things about Palmer Amaranth first. So Palmer Amaranth, as you know, is a member of pigweed family. It's not only one of the species from the pigweed families. We have other family of members from pigweed family, like waterhemp, common waterhemp, or tumble pigweed or redwood pigweed. But Palmer Amaranth is the most dominant and most problematic species in various parts of Kansas, especially northwestern Kansas. So why it is a more problem? Why it is a more challenging? The biology of Palmer Amaranth, it makes it more difficult to control. So what kind of biological feature it has? It shows extended period of emergence, and Sarah brought up some of the factors, the temperatures and the moisture, how it influenced the Palmer Amaranth emergence throughout the seasons. We have been seeing Palmer coming in flushes throughout the seasons. It starts in northwest Kansas or central part of Kansas, somewhere like early May, and then we keep seeing Palmer Amaranth with every rainfall event. So extended period of emergence is a one feature, and then it's aggressive in growth. When the moisture is sufficient and high temperature is there, it can grow like an inch per day. So by the time you start planning on your herbicide applications, the Palmer is already like foot tall or 2 foot tall. So this is the challenging characteristics with the Palmer Amaranth: aggressive growth and prolific seed producers. Palmer can produce up to 1 million seeds per plant, per female plant, if it's growing, without any crop competition. So high seed production, high growth, and even high outcrossings. It can, exchange genetic material from field to field or even within a field. So you can see the outcrossing potential of Palmer Amaranth can also help extending or spreading the resistance issues or herbicide resistance issues. So all these features make Palmer, more prone to herbicide resistance evolution, as well as a more difficult weed species to manage in our systems in Kansas. So since 2014, we have been leading a project understanding the distribution and the frequency of herbicide resistance, or what kind of resistance pattern we see in pigweed species, especially Palmer Amaranth, and we have added common waterhemp. So you see those green triangles in different counties here, the north central or northwestern or south central Kansas. These are the counties we have surveyed in last 6 to 7 years. We have more than 200 populations from this area, where we are screening to find out what kind of resistance or what kind of a response to those populations to most commonly use herbicide in these areas. And we also been doing some screening work on common waterhemp from soybean fields from the southeast part of the state. So the idea is to kind of know what kind of pattern or resistance pattern we see in these two species and plan our management programs accordingly. Not going to show all the results we have so far on this project, but really want to emphasize that we have documented few cases of multiple herbicide-resistant Palmer Amaranth, and especially from south central Kansas, like Barton County or Pratt County, and even Kiowa County, we have documented cases of 4 to 5-way resistance in Palmer Amaranth. And we have reported resistance to even 2,4-D, one of our best herbicides to kill Palmer Amaranth, 2,4-D, Roundup, or glyphosate, Glean, which is the chlorsulfuron we have been using a lot in our wheat and even in other crops, Atrax, Atrazine, and even Clisto, which is a more chemistry for corn and sorghum, mesotrione. So we have documented cases of multiple resistance or multiple herbicide resistance in Palmer Amaranth. So it's not only resistance to glyphosate. Glyphosate resistance, based on our survey, we have been seeing more widespread in Kansas. But the problem, the biggest challenge is multiple resistance. It's not only glyphosate resistance, but resistance to other chemistries like Callisto, Atrax, Glean, or 2,4-D is making Palmer Amaranth really, really challenging from a management standpoint. So for today's talk, I have put together some of the results from the field studies we have done over the last 2 years, looking at different situations, different scenarios, what kind of options we are left with in terms of Palmer Amaranth control. Let's say this field you see in this picture is fully infested with the Palmer Amaranth after wheat harvest. And let's say this is the glyphosate resistance. The glyphosate we have been using a lot in our burn down programs. If glyphosate is not working, what other options we have? So this was the main aim of this study, to look at other alternative burn down chemistries or burn down programs that can be used in post-wheat harvest situations. So here is a list of products we tested over 2 years, 2019 and 20. This study was done in Hayes Ag Experiment Station. And for some reason, the field we selected in the population we were working with was not glyphosate resistance. This was a glyphosate susceptible population. And we tested herbicides, things like Roundup itself, Clarity, which is Dicamba, 2,4-D itself, which are our standard burn down program, and then their tank mixtures. And then we had Gramoxone based or paraquat based program, Gramoxone alone or with some soil residual herbicides like Atrax, Sencor, Valor, 2,4-D, Spartan, Authority Supreme, Panther MTZ. These are like 2 to 3 different herbicide sites of action premixtures. And the idea was to add those chemistries with Gramoxone so that we can avoid or prevent the late season flush of those Palmer Amaranth. And then we had Sharpen-based products like Sharpen-based programs, Sharpen alone or with Atrazine or Sencor or 2,4-D. And then we had a Liberty-based program, Liberty itself or Liberty with 2,4-D Roundup or Liberty Clarity and Roundup. So it's a big list of herbicides we investigated over the 2 year. And you can see the consistent control or consistent efficacy of Gramoxone-based program or paraquat-based programs we found in 2 years, 2019 and 2020. One thing I really like to emphasize, these products were tested when those Palmer Amaranth plants were 2 to 2.5 feet tall, and they had started producing the inflorescence. So they were ready to produce the seeds and flowers. So these were the big Palmer Amaranth, not the smaller, like 3 to 4 inch tall Palmer Amaranth. So we were testing these chemistries, on the challenging or the biggest plants of Palmer Amaranth in wheat stubble. So among these chemistries, as you see, Gramoxone-based programs provided pretty consistent control and effective control. And along with those, Sharpen-based programs were also pretty effective in 2019. And those Liberty-based programs, especially the 3-way mixture, had pretty good control of Palmer Amaranth in that late season application in wheat stubble. Here is a picture of showing the infestation of Palmer Amaranth in non-treated plots. This is 4 weeks after treatment. And this is one of the treatment. I just showed the results, Gramoxone with Spartan or sulfentrazone. Cleaned up everything here in that plot at 4 weeks after treatments. So the idea of adding Spartan with that Gramoxone is to have some residual activity for preventing any late season in September if there is any flush coming that can prevent from those residuals. So moving on to some programs we investigated for Palmer Amaranth control in sorghum. So as you know, the iGrowth sorghum is coming to the market. It's going to be available this year. And the herbicide, which is labeled for iGrowth sorghum, is Emiflex. So Emiflex is a Mazamox group 2 herbicide and mainly used for broad spectrum weed control. So the technology has been, in place for controlling grass weed species in grain sorghum. So this will be one of the, first herbicide resistant technologies available to the growers, especially in the western Kansas, for controlling grass weed species in sorghum. But Emiflex has also been known for controlling broadleaf weed species. So my idea was to look at that Emiflex with our standard pre-programs in terms of Palmer control, if it does any benefit to adding Emiflex with those standard pre-programs to control Palmer Amaranth in grain sorghum. So here is a list of treatments we had. Emiflex 9 ounce, that's the pre-applied rate of Emiflex, and 6 ounce will be the post-applied rate of Emiflex. So Emiflex by itself, and then we had a tank mixture of Emiflex with our standard program like Atrazine, Bicep, Degree, Extra, or Lexar, or Sequence, Callisto. So these are all our standard sorghum pre-programs we used for our weed control at the recommended rates. So all these programs were applied on June 10th at the time of sorghum planting. And this is the two control ratings we took towards end of June and towards end of July. You can see the early rating, the blue bars here. Majority of the programs were pretty effective, showing pretty good control. And later on, when we got some moisture, some rainfall events, some of those programs started breaking down. And if you see, Emiflex itself was not able to provide even more than 15-20% control compared to some of our standard programs like Degree Extra or Lexar with Emiflex had 90 to 95% control. So this is one of the picture I took at from Emiflex treatment at 9 ounce per acre rate, and you can clearly see the Palmer Amaranth infestation. Hardly see any effect from Emiflex using pre on Palmer Amaranth. So it looks like a non-treated plot, but when we had Emiflex with the Lexar, our standard pre-program, pretty good looking plot, 95% control of Palmer Amaranth. So the take home out of this study was, if you're really looking to control Palmer Amaranth for your grain sorghum, this technology may not help. This technology may help controlling grass species, but for Palmer Amaranth control, it may not provide, the best control or the best efficacy from Emiflex. You definitely have to have your effective pre-programs, things like Degree Extra, Lexar, or Dual, or even Atrazine-based products. So this is something which very clear that broad spectrum weed control may not be expected from Emiflex, and that may be the case for kochia as well, because kochia populations are mostly resistant to group 2 herbicides in our area here. Moving on to some studies we did in controlling herbicide-resistant kochia and Palmer Amaranth in sunflower. This is a joint project with the University of Nebraska and Colorado State University. And Jeannie has been helping me doing this study in Colby. So the idea of doing this work was because there has been some changes in Residual label recently for sunflowers. Residual has been labeled now to use as a post in sunflower. So the idea was to look at that Residual application, post applications, along with the pre-applied standard programs, if they can extend the residual activity for weed control throughout the season in those 3 states. So we did this study in Hayes and Colby, and then Scotts Bluff and Sydney, Nebraska, as well as in Eastern Colorado. So here is a set of treatments we investigated. We had 3 sets of programs: Prowl-based programs, or Broad-X-based, or Spot and Chart-based programs. So Prowl itself, just a pre-program, and then we had 3 timings of Zidua, Prowl followed by Zidua at 2 leaf stage of, or 2 true leaf stage of sunflower, or 4 true leaf stage of sunflower, or 6 true leaf stage of sunflower. So same set of treatments for Broad-X. Broad-X is S-metolachlor and sulfentrazone is a premix, highly effective chemistry for sunflower as well as soybean. So same set of treatments for Broad-X and Spot and Charge, same set of treatments. So here is some data from Hayes. This is a dryland site, and you can see majority of those programs help to reduce kochia and Palmer Amaranth. So these are blue bars representing Palmer Amaranth, and the red bars showing Acacia plants. This is the density data from a meter row from each plot. So with the help of those programs, we were able to reduce the density of both weed species. But if you see the Broad-X-based programs, we were able to reduce those densities to 0. However, there was no significant difference among these programs statistically. This is the 2020 again haze location dryland site, and we also see similar kind of response, having the Broad-X based program, Broad-X itself, or followed by Zidua programs, had slightly better control of Palmer Amaranth, Kochia, or other pigweed species compared to prowl based programs. However, there was not a whole lot of difference statistically among these programs. And we did not see any benefit of adding Zidua at those 3 different timings when we had effective pre-programs in front. Weed biomass, no difference in weed biomass and no difference in grain yield among those treatments from non-treated or weed-free. So there was a lot of variations, and we did not see any difference for the yield or yield difference among those programs in haze. Okay, moving on to some kochia work we have been doing, controlling multiple herbicide-resistant kochia with oxenic mixtures. But before that, we have another poll question here. To which of the following herbicides kochia has developed resistance in Kansas? Either one option is glyphosate, dicamba, atrazine, fluroxypyr, all of the above, or none of the above. What do you guys think?
And for folks who are unfamiliar, fluroxypyr would be starane.
Fluroxypyr will be starane, group 4 herbicide. Yes, thanks, Jeannie.
Yep.
Okay, pretty good. All of the above. Yes, that's true. That's right. We have a resistance to glyphosate, dicamba, atrazine, fluroxypyr, and even now we have resistance to metribuzin in some of the lines we got from Garden City area. So resistance to all these chemistry has been reported in Kansas. So a little bit on the glyphosate resistance in kochia. As most of you know, historically, Kansas or Western Kansas was the first state to document glyphosate resistance in kochia in 2007. But since then, we have about 10 different United States and 3 Canadian prairies where kochia or glyphosate-resistant kochia has been documented. As a widespread evolution of glyphosate resistance in kochia. So since then, growers have been using some of the oxenic herbicides like dicamba, both pre and post, and we have been seeing more and more dicamba resistance cases in kochia as well. So in terms of control, in terms of management of these glyphosate-resistant or dicamba-resistant kochia, so here is some work being done by Dr. Randall Curry at Garden City and Dr. Curtis Thompson, our previous extension weed specialist in Tribune. So this slide I took from the work they did in Garden City, and they wanted to know the pre-programs applied in fall or spring timings. So you can see the same set of treatments, atrazine with clarity or atrazine with clarity with Zidua, or atrazine clarity with sharpen, or Corvus, or Atrax with sharpen and authority MTZ at those label rates. They sprayed in fall, that was early December, and then they also sprayed same chemistries in early spring, that was on towards end of February. So based on the control ratings they took over the season in 2015, they found the spring applications had more extended activity compared to fall applications. And that was probably because of the moisture they got in the fall and the dissipation of those chemistries. As Sarah mentioned, some of those factors can influence the soil residuals or the pre-programs over the season, and we need overlapping residuals or layer residuals to keep our fields clean. So, but truly from this study, we found like spring application, if you have a good moisture in early spring, that can take you to long way for kochia control in your fallow situation. But if we have multiple resistant kochia like glyphosate and dicamba resistant kochia, what are the other post options? If you are missing, if you missed your pre-programs or pre-applications, what are the post options? So this is a study we did in Hayes last year, looking at some oxenic mixtures on glyphosate and dicamba resistant kochia control. So treatment we investigated was the Clarity dicamba at higher rate, 16 ounce. This is all been investigated in a fallow situation. And the second treatment we had a Pixaro. Pixaro is another premix of haloxifene and fluroxypyr, all group 4 herbicides. And then duplacin or dicloprop is another synthetic auxin or group 4 herbicides, or 2,4-D itself. So these are the standalone programs, dicamba by itself, Pixaro by itself, or dicloprop by itself, or 2,4-D by itself. The label recommended rates, the highest rate recommended for kochia control. And then we had combinations, 2-way combinations, and as well as 3-way combinations to look at if there is any interaction among these chemistries controlling those glyphosate and dicamba resistant kochia. So all treatments were applied at 3 to 4 inch tall kochia. And here are some control ratings or results at 3 weeks, 6 weeks, and 9 weeks after treatment. If you see those standalone programs like Clarity, Pixaro, or duplacin, or even 2,4-D, we did not achieve more than 60-65% control in among all those ratings. But when you had some combinations like Clarity with Pixaro or Clarity with dicloprop, the control was about 90 to 95% of those resistant kochia. And same was the case with the 3-way mixture of Clarity, Pixaro, duplacin, or Clarity, Pixaro with 2,4-D, or Clarity with dicloprop and 2,4-D. So control was 95 to 98% with those 3-way mixtures. So what it tells that these auxins or synthetic auxin herbicides, they interact, they have some synergistic effect when we tank mix, and can provide good control of glyphosate and dicamba resistant kochia if we are using those chemistries as a post emergence. One thing I like to emphasize here, this treatment, Clarity, duplacin, or 2,4-D, which is going to be a Scotch EXT. It has been the special local needs label has been submitted by New Farm Company, and should be available this summer for the growers to use in Kansas. Here are some pictures. It's a non-treated weedy check. You can see the level of infestation of resistant kochia line. This is a dicloprop by itself. You can see some suppression and stunting and some twisting with the auxins, but still a lot of kochia growing there. And this is 2,4-D. Seems like it didn't touch those kochia even. And this is your 3-way mixture of Scotch EXT, Clarity, duplacin, and 2,4-D at 6 weeks after treatment. Pretty good control, burn down all those kochia. Okay, the last topic I'm going to cover here is cover crops in northwestern Kansas or western Kansas. This is a work being done by our cropping system specialist, Dr. Augustina Bohr, based in Hayes. He and Dr. John Hallman from Garden City, they did some work in Colby and HB Ranch looking at spring planted cover crops, managing some of those herbicide-resistant weeds, especially herbicide-resistant kochia. So the results they found is compared to fallow treatment, if you plant spring peas or oats triticale mixture or oats triticale peas mixture, they were able to reduce the weed biomass compared to the fallow treatment, and same was the case in terms of weed densities. So the major weed species they had in these studies was a kochia, glyphosate-resistant kochia. So just by growing those cover crops, spring planted cover crops, they were able to reduce the density as well as the dry biomass. And same was the case for the HB Ranch. They found similar results with those treatments. So what is telling that Along with those effective pre and post programs, we need to look at some of the cultural practices like growing cover crops to reduce or to suppress those resistant kochia in this geography. Here is a picture I took from HB Ranch last year, the last summer. Here you on the left, you can see this is a oat triticale mix planted in early spring, and this is a side-by-side comparison. The fallow ground, you can see a lot of kochia growing here, and you see hardly anything there. And they had just cut those oat triticale mix when we took this picture. So pretty clear, evidence that replacing fallow with something like cover crops may help controlling those resistant lines of kochia or other weed species. That's all I have. I don't know if we have time to take questions, Jeannie.
Yeah, I think we're going to go ahead and run through some questions here for both Sarah and for Vipan. And we'll start with Craig from those here on Zoom. Again, if you do have questions and you're on Zoom, you can go ahead and throw those into the Q&A box. If you are on YouTube, you can throw those into the comments box and Aaron will hit on those. But Craig, what do we have here on our Zoom feed?
Yeah, I got a couple here so far. One goes back to, I think, the beginning of your presentation, Vipan, about the reason why you used 2,4-D amine and not LV6 in some of your tests. I believe that was on the Palmer Amaranth.
Okay, the question is why did I use amine, not ester? Well, there was no specific reason for that. I think amine formulation was available and wanted to test. We had tested ester formulation as well, and that survived as well. So it's not about formulation. It was just availability of that formulation we had. We just tested that.
Okay, so there's no
difference in terms of efficacy in ester and amine.
All right. All right, the next one is, should they be using AMS or an AMS replacer with all their applications, and what would be the minimum rate to apply?
So if the question is on the weed stubble study, I showed some results. So all those programs were mixed with label and recommended rates of adjuvants like crop oil and MSO. I think most of those treatments goes with MSO, like 0.5% volume by volume. And AMS we included in the glyphosate treatments, and I think gramoxone treatments went with NIS as well as. So you have to look at those situation like in weed stubble when we were trying to control those Palmer Amaranth. Those are big Palmer Amaranth. And, at that time, like end of July, early August is kind of sometime the driest time, and the plants are under stress. So you definitely need to include those adjuvants to help those chemistries controlling those big plants or big Palmer Amaranth or big kochia in those stubbles.
All right, and then one more here. On the last side, was the fallow chem fallow program or tillage?
Okay, so if you're asking about the oxenic mixture study, those were all on fallow ground, no till fallow, no tillage ground.
Is there anything on YouTube?
No questions so far on YouTube.
Yeah, I see one from Jeannie. How big was the kochia when the auxin herbicides were applied? So those kochia in the fields, they were 3 to 4 inch tall, Jeannie, when we sprayed those oxenic mixtures.
Thanks, Vipan. I did get another question on my email for Sarah. When we're talking about overlapping residuals, is this something that everybody should be thinking about in every portion of their cropping system? Or is it something that we should be selectively putting in a specific portion of a wheat, corn, fallow rotation or something along those lines? How do we make sure that we aren't conditioning our weeds to expect some overlapping residuals?
You know, that's a good question, Jeannie. And I think it depends on some of your cultural practices, right? So, for example, that study that I showed the data from that my student is doing, I expected to see more need for those residuals in the wide rows where we don't get the canopy than in the narrow rows where we should get canopy sooner, right? So it's all about thinking about how long of an emergence period those weeds have and trying to keep them from emerging then. So if you're in a system where you've got good ground cover, good canopy cover, maybe it's a little bit less important. Again, our goal is to just try to prevent those weeds from producing those seeds. And so it's not going to look the same in every environment or every cropping system. Does that help?
It does. I think, you know, when we're looking at the herbicide line items on some of our crop budgets, they seem to get quite large at times. And so we're trying to figure out where's the best place to spend our money in some of those types of systems, and you know, how to prevent emergence and when do we need that overlapping residual. And so sometimes it's really hard to put that money into a crop that doesn't look as good, and the fact that maybe it is not canopied. And so that's I continually struggle with that type of a question on when is the time to put the money in.
And you know, that's something we've talked about before too, right, Jeannie, is what do we do when we have these kind of failed crops maybe, and what's it worth to try to keep the weed seeds out of there? So, yeah.
We do have a few more that came in here on Zoom if we have time.
Yep, let's do them.
All right, one here, he usually runs Atrazine and Dicamba here, you know, starting early March, going to Milo. He had a salesman that is trying to get him to adding in Valor. Is that helpful or is he wasting money?
Do you want to answer that, Vipan, or you want me to?
Yeah, you go ahead, Sarah.
I think some of it depends on the weeds that you're targeting, right? And you know, we have a lot of triazine resistant biotypes of different species out there. So, you know, maybe that Valor is going to get you something in that regard. But I really do think that the data say that, you know, the most important thing that we need to do is to try to keep those weeds out of our crops. And so that Valor is really not going to give you a ton of residual in terms of, you know, getting you through into the growing season. So if I had to choose where I was going to put it, I might put it at, you know, closer to planting instead of early March. But I don't know, maybe Vipan has a different opinion.
Well, yeah, I think I agree with you, Sarah. It depends on the target weed species you're targeting. If you're targeting like kochia or something, you'd better do it now. But if you are targeting something like Palmer Amaranth, it's better to go before planting. And we have seen some good results with adding a Valor in your pre programs in Milo. So again, I mean, it depends, and depends on the moisture available also now versus at the time of sorghum planting. If you can, you know, forecast a little bit that you will have some moisture, like some irrigated sorghum you want to try, that's the best. And one of the grower in central Kansas has been doing this last 6-7 years using Valor, you know, in irrigated ground. And I think it's working because the moisture is available during that time and helping him out for palmer control. But definitely needs or depends on the target weed species and the conditions around.
And one more here for you, Sarah. Would a half rate of Resicor, Residua, Atrazine on Roundup Ready post apply to corn at the V5 stage, will that help keep pigweeds out? Of course, they'd put other half as a pre ahead of planting corn or right at planting.
it should help. You know, Resicor is, from what I've seen in my plots here in Manhattan, is solid on pigweeds, and that Zidua should get you some residual activity with relatively little rainfall requirement for activation. So it sounds like a reasonable program. I haven't collected data on that exact system at this point, but it sounds reasonable to me. We do get a little bit nervous when we start talking half rates, but because the thing we want to guard against is metabolic herbicide resistance, and exposing those plants to those lower rates can kind of lend itself to that. But there's lots of economic reasons why we would want to go with a split rate, split shot like that. So, I think it would definitely be worth trying, for sure.
Yeah, I'd like to add that with Sarah's comment, we have done some work on Resicor and Atrazine applying as with the post treatments in central Kansas in irrigated corn, and we see some advantage. I think it depends on the soil type as well. If you're working with the sandy soil, you definitely need to add something with the post treatment. We have been seeing those pre-programs worn out pretty quick. 3 weeks after, 4 weeks after applications, they are gone, and you definitely need another layered chemistries with your post-treatment. And we saw with early post-treatments, adding Resicor or Zidua or Atrazine, and we had mesotrione also in those treatments, worked good on Palmer Amaranth, and that was glyphosate and mesotrione resistant Palmer Amaranth, by the way, in central Kansas we work with. So adding those residuals is definitely going to help, but you need to know your soil type, and you need to adjust those rates. You cannot just say half rate or 1/4 of rate. I think that's where it's a catch is there, that you definitely need to know your soil and the seed bank you're working with. If you have a heavy infestation of Palmer Amaranth, that may not look as good as compared to where it has moderate or low level of infestation. So, and I think I missed another question. There was the oat triticale ground planted back to wheat in the fall? It was planted in milo stubble. It was not in wheat. So basically they were working with wheat sorghum fallow rotations, and after harvesting milo or sorghum, they spring planted cover crops. When the fallow phase started in spring, they came and planted those peas and oats and triticale and oats triticale peas mixture and left a treatment of fallow. So they wanted to compare that fallow phase in spring. So basically in milo stubble, they planted those cover crops in spring.
Craig, looks like there's a few more questions popped up there.
Yeah, but they're actually more suited for our weed control in Milo segment. That will be in a few weeks. So I didn't know if we want to address them now or.
Okay, so let's do this. So we're already quite a ways over time, and I know I hate to shut down questions on this. Why don't we leave those questions up here and have Sarah and Vipan just type answers into them? But we'll go ahead and kind of finish this up, and then Sarah and Vipan will hang with us for a little while. So you guys who asked the questions, Chris and Jordan, and the one logged in is Crop Talk, we'll get your questions answered. But let's go ahead and kind of finish up here since we're already a little over time. I hate to shut down questions, but it's one of those, I don't want to keep everybody incredibly long on this. Okay, so let's go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
Yep. Let me get this up here in the box. Over in the chat box, if you're on Zoom, you should be able to see the link for the Qualtrics survey. It's our evaluation for this program and in the whole series. It's going to deal, I think there are some questions that deal specifically with this program today. It's really important. If you don't mind and you're still logged on, and it looks like we're losing a few, but hopefully you don't lose you before you go ahead and fill this out for us. Again, this is an important survey. It's not going to take you but just a minute or two. Important information for us to evaluate how we are doing our programming this winter, especially important with the way things are going and how we're going to be able to continue to do our programming throughout our trying times we're having with pandemic and everything. But if you could please complete that, that would be great. It also has to do with some demographics and things like that, so we know who you are. We're not, it's anonymous, so we're not going to know your names, but it's important information for us as we're working on our reporting. So and that link is in the chat box. It's also going to be in the comment section on YouTube. Jeannie has posted up. Don't forget, next week we do have corn insect resistant rootworm and western bean cutworm. Same time, 10:30 to 11:30 next Tuesday, February 16th. Our two presenters that were on today are going to be back on tomorrow. So if you want to, again, if you're from the north central area of the state, you can log in tomorrow as well, and they will touch on information geared towards that area as far as weed control, as well as Palmer and kochia control. If you didn't see the link earlier, if you need your CCA credits, make sure you have either scanned in. We had the QR code for you to go ahead and receive those. If not, make sure you email Jeannie Falk-Jones at jfalkjones@ksu.edu to receive your CCA credits. And again, if you have some questions, you want to throw them up into the chat box, or Vipan or Sarah have seen them. They can continue to stay on with a few of those late questions and can do so in the chat box as well. With that, I think that pretty much wraps things up for us today. Again, we thank everybody for attending and being on these. These are recorded, so pay attention to your local extension units, and they will probably get some of this information out to you in weeks to come or days to come, however that unit is putting that information out. So I want to thank our Northwest North Central Crops team for continuing to help with these. And again, thanks for joining us, and that's going to be it.